What is going on, pro wrestling fans? Welcome back to the J Area. My name is Jose Ramos Jr., and welcome to a post-show reaction to AEW Dynamite. I don't really do much post-show reactions to AEW unless it's like one of their main pay-per-views, but for the time being, that it was AEW Grand Slam from Arthur Ashe Stadium, why not go ahead and do a post-show reaction to this? We had some eventful moments that had taken place, and like I said, Grand Slam, one of those marquee events for AEW Dynamite. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We had an opener. It was Bryan Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness, a matchup decades in the making. It goes all the way back to their Ring of Honor days. And of course, in the last few years, we've seen Nigel McGuinness on commentary allude to his rivalry with the American Dragon, albeit Bryan would never really acknowledge it, and the lead up to this matchup has really stirred up some controversy among pro wrestling fans. There are some who may not even know about the history between the two, and there are those members of the audience like myself who I feel like they could have done a little bit more build up towards this matchup. We've had obviously the promo segments by Nigel McGuinness leading up to the matchup itself, but I would have liked a lot more emotion when it came to what is this all about. We know that Nigel McGuinness had referenced in the past how the success that Bryan Danielson has amassed throughout the course of his career very well could have been the same path that Nigel McGuinness could have had things worked out in his favor. They don't really allude to his time in TNA. They don't allude to his time away from the ring and why it is that he left in-ring competition. But nonetheless, we get the entrance from Nigel McGuinness. And first off, I'm going to say I think it was the right call to have this be the opener for Grand Slam. It allows the opportunity for the audience members to really get invested in ring action, as well as giving them something fresh, something new. We never thought we were going to see Nigel McGuinness versus Bryan Danielson inside an AEW ring, but here we are. And Nigel McGuinness, after making his way to the ring, awaits his opponent, Bryan Danielson, and we hear his theme music throughout the arena with no appearance of Bryan Danielson. That is until the music ceases, and then we want to see, or rather, Nigel McGuinness wants us to see the referee count to 10, awarding him the victory to the match due to a no-show by Bryan Danielson. But instead, we hear the music of Europe's final countdown, and really transporting us back all the way to those Ring of Honor days. Bryan Danielson makes his triumphant return since the attack at All Out, and to see him and Nigel McGuinness in the ring, I'll come out and I'll be transparent with you. I didn't get to see the Ring of Honor matches live for what they were. At that time, I was watching just the WWE. I knew of rumblings of other promotions such as TNA and Ring of Honor, but that wasn't on my radar. I didn't have the opportunity to watch those products. But knowing what I know now here as a 26-year-old, I was so happy to see that this was a matchup that we were finally going to get to see after so many years since their last matchup. I think the matchup itself, entertaining. What more did you expect between two of the great technicians of their time? Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson certainly brought it, and the story really was sold around the attack of Bryan Danielson's shoulder. Nigel McGuinness continuously targeted at that shoulder, and you would see them, trade submission holds against one another, trying to get the upper hand on their opponent. There was one spot that really caught me off guard, and I believe they referred to it as the London Tower, where Nigel McGuinness had held Bryan Danielson's neck and had his feet hanging off of the top rope and kind of fell into almost like a neck breaker maneuver. That really got a good pop out of me. But the matchup, for what it was, I think, for what it's worth, was a good matchup. I'm not going to pretend like it was a wrestling classic. One thing that I do find interesting on commentary, that is, when you have guys like Tony Schiavone, Excalibur, Jim Ross was on the call for this first matchup here. I feel like a lot of times, and most of the time it is warranted, but I feel like a lot of times they hype up these matches as a fantastic match, a great match. And I won't argue that it is a great match, but there are times where it feels like they say that for every matchup. And I feel like if every match is great, or if every match is special, then are any matches special. Now, with that being said, this was a good matchup. I had fun with it. It was nice to see two old rivals return in the ring in what seemingly will be their last encounter, because Bryan Danielson, as we know, will be retiring pretty soon. Nigel McGuinness, I expect to return to the commentary booth, but one of the telling signs of this matchup was the finish when Bryan Danielson gets the pinfall on, or not rather the pinfall, but gets the submission on Nigel McGuinness, forcing him to tap out. But prior to that submission, apparently Nigel McGuinness mouths the words, "Thank you." And I thought that was such an appropriate end to the matchup because Nigel McGuinness has been wanting this matchup with Bryan Danielson, whether you want to go kayfabe or not. We all know that these two have a great amount of respect for one another. So to have them have this matchup finally to conclude their rivalry and again seemingly conclude Nigel McGuinness's in-ring career as we approach the end of Bryan Danielson's, just a real sweet moment between the two and a great deal of respect for both individuals. Big fan of Nigel in this case, and of course I've always been a big fan of Bryan. But let's transition into the next matchup. It was for the FTW Championship as Roderick Strong would be challenging Hook for his FTW Championship. I gotta say, the matchup itself was fine. No problem with it. It was your standard FTW matchup. But it was the after the match that really gained a lot of focus from me, that is, and a lot of interest. Traditionally, the Undisputed Kingdom are presented as heels. Those are your bad guys. Hook is your good guy. So for Roderick Strong and the other members, Matt Taven and Mike Bennett, to give a handshake to Hook, is it just a sign of respect? Are we seeing a shift in position for the Undisputed Kingdom? Will they be turning babyface? Something to look at. But the real news really is the fact that Hook, following his matchup against Roderick Strong, he would defeat Strong, by the way, he announces to the crowd in attendance that he will officially be retiring the FTW Championship. And he awarded it back to his father, Taz. They shared a precious moment between father and son where they shared a hug. And you saw both of them were kind of getting emotional. It was nice seeing Taz show a little bit of display of emotion. They don't really show him and Hook always together. They referenced it early on during Team Taz. We saw the run-in that they had at Allin, but not too many times do we get those nice moments between the father and son. As for the retiring of the FTW Championship, I think it's the right call. I think the FTW Championship was a great opportunity to really push forward younger talent. You saw what it did for guys like Ricky Starks, Brian Cage. You can even argue Jack Perry, a young star like Chris Jericho, not, and Hook, of course. But you don't need it. One of the more complaints about AEW is the oversaturation of championship titles or the lack of focus on those divisions. I feel like the FTW Championship really stood out as like a hardcore title, if anything, or a TV title. Not really a first, secondary, or third tier championship, but somewhere near the bottom, really. So I don't think they need the title. I'm glad they're retiring it, and hopefully this gives Hook an opportunity to move forward in his career. I love the connection to his father, Taz. Love the lineage of the FTW Championship, but we gotta carve a path for Hook. I think he's a great young talent. He has the charisma in terms of his presence. He certainly has the in-ring capability, but I need to see more from Hook. I need to see him grow. The potential's there, but we gotta start giving him a little bit more challenge and getting him out of his comfort zone. So I'm glad to see that we're moving away from that period of his career, and now hopefully we can start seeing him go after like the TNT title, maybe even a world title shot in the future. Who knows? But moving on from that, the next matchup here, and what I thought was match of the night, was the tag title match between Kyle Fletcher and Will Ospreay, challenging the Young Bucks, Nicholas and Matthew Jackson, again for the AEW World Tag Titles. Easily match of the night. I watched the opener, Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson, and I thought it was a good match. I had fun with it, but for me, it never really turned into that next gear. Whereas the tag title match had it all over the place. You had great athleticism, you had great spots, tandem tag team action, and the story that they told between Don Callis and Fletcher and Will Ospreay. He wanted them, or we wanted Kyle Fletcher to use the screwdriver to defeat the Young Bucks, but Will Ospreay vetoed that, said we don't need that, gave it to the official. I believe it was Bryce Rensburg, if I'm not mistaken, or it might have been Rick Knox. Now that I think it was Rick Knox actually. Gives it the screwdriver, and it led to the ultimate demise of that tag team. The Young Bucks would emerge victorious. I don't know who is going to defeat the Young Bucks. I don't know who's going to be taking away the titles from them, but they're running that risk of holding the titles for too long. Now, part of me actually thought that we might see the crowning of a new tag team champions here, because typically when you have these marquee events, whether it's AEW or WWE, you want to give the crowd something special. You want to give them maybe a title change, something significant for you to hang your hat on. They didn't do it here, and it wasn't necessarily the bad move. It makes sense. It's the safe move for sure. But being that Will Ospreay is the international champion, you don't really need him to be a double champion at all. I totally get it. But the match itself, great matchup. I personally loved it. I think it was match of the night by far. Following that, we did have a segment where Prince Nana was going to be interviewed by Tony Schiavone in regards to the status of one Swerve Strickland. We haven't seen him since his house had been burnt down and was defeated by Hangman Adam Page at All Out in that steel cage match. A great steel cage match at that. Prince Nana, of course, recognizing that Swerve Strickland is making great progress, but he's not really coming back yet. And before we really got any more substantial information from one Prince Nana, we had the debut of one MVP. You heard his voice coming out, had the cane and everything. And the one thing that was interesting about what MVP had to say was his criticism of Swerve Strickland. Not necessarily the athlete that he is or the professional wrestler that he presents himself to be, but of his management. He criticizes Prince Nana and even presents him with his card, asking him to present it to his client, Swerve Strickland, saying whenever he's ready to be taken seriously, and that MVP wants to talk business. A big allusion to the Hurt Business that MVP ran with in the WWE with the likes of Cedric Alexander, Shelton Benjamin, and of course the almighty Bobby Lashley. This is going to be an interesting story point in AEW because we know that MVP and Bobby Lashley are both free agents. Well, maybe not MVP anymore, being that he appeared on AEW. But the story that they could tell here is that MVP wants to enlist the services of one Swerve Strickland. But Prince Nana and Swerve Strickland have been inseparable for years now. What if Swerve denies the services of MVP, leading to him bringing his own star in one Bobby Lashley? I don't know about you, but the prospect, the possibility of Bobby Lashley versus Swerve Strickland, now that's exciting. Two contrasting styles, two different type of athletes, two different eras really, if you think about it, because Bobby, for better or for worse, doesn't look like it, but he's been doing this for 20 years at this point. Debuting in 2005 on the main roster for WWE SmackDown, and would you look at that, it's almost 2025. That's 20 years right there for a Bobby Lashley. That would be a great matchup. I'm looking forward to it. If it happens, of course, we can't assume, but the allusion to the Hurt Business, MVP showing up, Bobby Lashley being a free agent, I feel like it's only a matter of time before we see him. I did mention in a previous video, though, that Bobby Lashley might not necessarily go to AEW. He does have ties with TNA, and I did, why not a match with Moose? That'd be a great matchup. Nonetheless, if he does show up with AEW, a matchup against Swerve Strickland, I think would be great. But now I'm going to go into the negatives. I'm a fan of Mariah May. I'm a fan of the glamour that is Mariah May. Her story with Toni Storm, the year-long story, was one of AEW highlights. This matchup here for the AEW Women's title against Yuka, I didn't buy it, unfortunately. I wanted to get into it, but I think what followed the matchup, much like the FTW Championship, was the highlight, not the match itself. Unfortunately, that matchup I think is going to be forgettable, and in terms of the card that was AEW Grand Slam, it was the weakest one on the night. But following that, we did get an appearance by Willow Nightingale, who seemingly wants a title opportunity against Mariah May. But before we had anything of substance in regards to that storyline, Mina Shirakawa's entrance theme would play, almost setting up a distraction. And Willow Nightingale would turn around, allowing Mariah May to get the jump on her, and Mariah May runs outside of the ring to ringside to the entrance to embrace her good friend Mina Shirakawa, again seeming confused. She doesn't know what's going on with Mariah May. This is the May that she has been friends with for the last few years. So it'll be interesting where we go with that. Obviously, Willow Nightingale wants a title shot. We know that Mina Shirakawa is a good friend of Mariah May. Mariah May is the champion. And will we get something more with Yuka? Because she came out and confronted both of them in the entranceway. Again, unfortunately one of the weaker segments in the night, but one to keep an eye on, of course, because it is in regards to the AEW Women's World Title. And speaking of world titles, we have to talk about that main event. Darby Allin, Jon Moxley, with the winner receiving a title opportunity at Wrestle Dream against One American Dragon, the AEW World Champion, Bryan Danielson. It was exactly what you thought it would be. Two physical wrestlers who aren't afraid to brawl, although they will ball out as well. Had a physical matchup. We saw blood early on as there was a spot where Darby Allin began to bleed within his mouth after a ring rope spot where Jon Moxley seemingly, bridged it in between his mouth. I don't know what that was about, to tell you the truth. We did get some blood out of it though. And there was even a spot where Marina Shafir gets the padding removed from ringside, and it's really just boards laid out, and Darby Allin goes for like a suicide dive of sort, but ultimately would crash on his back in a painful manner. And then following that, Jon Moxley would deliver a suplex of sort where the back of Darby's neck and the upper area of his back would fall on the steel steps. Just a real physical matchup. At one point, Jon Moxley even had like a near rear naked chokehold on Darby Allin, and he began foaming at the mouth, foaming at the possibility of losing his title opportunity that he earned by winning the Royal Rampage a couple months ago prior to All In. And ultimately, that's exactly what happened. We saw Jon Moxley defeat Darby Allin. He is now the #1 contender and will be competing against Bryan Danielson. Almost said Daniel Bryan. Will be competing against Bryan Danielson at Wrestle Dream in Washington. I don't know how I feel about that. We knew for months that Darby Allin was going to be getting a title opportunity against Bryan Danielson at Grand Slam. Change of plans. He's now going to be fighting Jon Moxley to defend that right for the title. And initially, I always go back to All In because I predicted Bryan Danielson would lose that title or lose the match to Swerve Strickland. But if he won, I could definitely see him losing the title at Wrestle Dream to Darby Allin. Well, fast forward, Darby Allin doesn't have that title match now. It is now Jon Moxley facing off against Bryan Danielson. The story they could be telling here. I thought that Bryan Danielson for sure was going to lose at Wrestle Dream to a guy from Washington, someone like Swerve, someone like a Darby Allin. Well, that's off the table now, unless they want to make it a triple threat match. Now, that's a possibility still, but I don't think it works. I don't think it works in AEW's MO. That's not something they usually do, not the type of angle they run. What they could be doing, right, hear me out here as I put my Booker hat on. Yeah, have Jon Moxley beat Bryan Danielson, because I don't know when else you beat him. Do you do it at Full Gear? Do you do it at World's End? Maybe. But I think it would be a real great moment for Bryan Danielson to lose in his home state. You want to lose at home. Why not? You have Jon Moxley beat him. He's an established star. There's already heat there, being that the BCC, the Wheeler Yuta stuff, Bryan Danielson, there's already heat there. Darby Allin can come in later and defeat Jon Moxley because of the matchup that we just saw. Because there's heat there already. There's not necessarily heat between Darby and Bryan Danielson. The transfer of the title will be Bryan to Mox to Darby. Call me a madman, but that's my initial thought, coming out of Grand Slam. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. If you enjoy this reaction, please give it a like, comment down below what you thought about Grand Slam, and what are your thoughts about the main event, being that Darby Allin loses his title opportunity to one Jon Moxley. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all the pro wrestling content such as this, and be sure to check out my initial thoughts of the Mr. McMahon docuseries that Netflix has just released. Of course, I want to thank you guys for joining me in this video tonight. Make sure you do all of that, and make sure you keep up to date with all the videos like I said, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.